Pointing over a rusty wall, Dale Earnhardt was not just any NASCAR racer. He was the one whose rough, unapologetic driving style and fearless approach to pushing his car to the absolute limit earned him the enduring nickname the Intimidator. Yet, there was always a looming darkness around the high banks of the Daytona 500, a place that would give rise to stories of a lifelong curse that eventually contributed to his tragic and early death. He didn't stumble into the sport by accident. He was practically born clutching a steering wheel. His destiny set in motion long before he even understood what it meant to dominate an asphalt battlefield. Born on April 29, 1951, in the heart of North Carolina, Earnhardt entered a world already steeped in motor oil and burning rubber. His father, Ralph Earnhardt, was a legendary short track driver, celebrated for his skill, grit, and relentless determination, a man who helped shape the fierce Southern racing culture that would later define the very essence of NASCAR. With a bloodline infused by engines and roaring crowds, it was only a matter of time before Dale followed suit. To say he took to racing would be an understatement. By the time he was just 12, he was already sneaking into his father's car. And this wasn't mere childish mischief. Legend holds that he nearly managed to pull off a miraculous victory against one of his father's toughest rivals. A feat that would have been stunning, not just because of his tender age, but because it proved a raw, natural talent that couldn't be taught, only inherited. These were the early whispers of a boy who, before he could even legally hold a driver's license, exhibited a profound intuition for handling a roaring stock car, outsmarting seasoned veterans, and carving through a field of racers with uncanny composure. Yet between Dale and the sunlit stage of NASCAR stardom lay numerous hurdles and hesitations. Much like any devoted parent, Ralph Earnhardt harbored mixed feelings about his son taking on such a dangerous path. The racing circuits of the American South during that era were unforgiving places where a small mistake could lead to catastrophic consequences, and those who danced too close to the edge often paid a terrible price. Despite his reservations, Ralph could not deny that racing flowed through his son's veins. When Dale, driven by unshakable resolve, decided to drop out of high school to pursue racing full-time, Ralph recognized there was no turning back. He understood that no classroom could contain his son's passion, and no textbook could quench Dale's thirst for high-speed glory. This wasn't just about winning trophies on the track, it was about an elemental need for speed, a restless energy coursing through Dale's life. That fire burned not only in the roar of engines, but in every decision he made and every goal he set. And so the young Earnhardt barreled forward into a world where racing was more than a career. It was a test of heart, skill, courage, and destiny. He would face fierce competition and the ghosts of his own lineage, forge rivalries that would light up the grandstands, and pay homage to the deep American tradition of stock car racing. He would ultimately become an icon, a man whose legacy intertwined triumph with tragedy, speed with sorrow, and honor with heartbreak. Every turn of his wheel, every slipstream he caught, and every thunderous finish line he crossed would carry echoes of that first secret drive at age 12, of his legendary father's cautious hopes and fears, and of the Daytona curse that would forever haunt the pages of NASCAR history. Dale Earnhardt had always seemed determined to live life at full throttle, both on and off the track. Even before he became a household name in NASCAR, he'd earned a reputation for barreling forward with decisions as quickly as he pressed his foot down on the accelerator. That unyielding rush toward the future was already evident in 1968, when, at just 17 years old, he took the surprisingly bold step of marrying his first wife, Latane Brown. It was an age when most teenagers were still navigating high school dances and planning weekend outings. But Dale, with his rebellious spirit and the roar of engines seemingly echoing in his ears, was hurtling toward adulthood at breakneck speed. The marriage, rushed into despite the skeptical whispers of family and friends who warned against such a young union, reflected the impulsive nature of a man who refused to take the slower lane in any aspect of his life. Just 1 year later, in 1969, Dale and Laytane welcomed a son, Kerry, into their rapidly evolving world. At a time when his peers might have been dreaming of prom nights or saving up for their first car, Dale was already juggling the responsibilities of fatherhood. Still, as with many endeavors sparked too soon, cracks began to show well before the checkered flag of a successful family life could be waved. The notion of defying conventional wisdom and forging their own reckless path might have had a romantic allure at first, but passion alone couldn't sustain the marriage. By 1970, their union, once a daring gamble taken against all odds, had run its course. It ended swiftly, almost as fast as a pit crew changing 4 tires on race day. In an era when divorces often carried stigma, Dale's first marriage ended quietly but decisively, leaving behind lessons he would carry forward, even if he didn't slow down long enough to reflect on them deeply. His personal life, no less tumultuous than the high-speed chases on the track, soon saw another sharp turn. Just 1 year after splitting with Brown, Dale steered himself headlong into a second marriage. This time, he chose Brenda G., a woman whose own life was intertwined with the racing world, given that her father, Robert G., was a respected NASCAR car builder. If the first marriage had seemed rushed, the second was no less steeped in the aroma of motor oil and burning rubber. Both bride and groom understood the pulsating rhythms of racing culture better than most outsiders ever could. Within 3 short years, they welcomed 2 children into their lives, a daughter, Kelly, and a son, Dale Earnhardt Jr., who would one day carry the family name into NASCAR legend. To outsiders, it might have seemed that Dale was finally putting roots down, building a legacy both on the racetrack and at home. Yet, true to form, this second marriage also sped through its course with a swiftness that left onlookers blinking in surprise. Like a daring overtake on the final lap, its end came without a long public drama or confessional interviews. Earnhardt managed to keep most details of the split away from the prying eyes of the press. In many ways, he treated his personal life much as he did his racing career. Private moments were best kept tightly in his own grip, with only the roar of the engines and the scoreboard for the public to scrutinize. The marriage dissolved quietly as his racing career began its meteoric rise. And with each turning point in his personal life, he continued to refine the fearless, uncompromising persona that would later come to define him. All the while, the man behind the wheel was becoming a symbol of the dual edges of speed, the exhilaration of outpacing everyone else, and the quiet toll it took on anyone brave or reckless enough to challenge tradition, societal expectations, and even the caution of those who cared for him. Those early marriages and swift endings would be just one layer of Dale Earnhardt's complex persona, a narrative as charged with tension as any final lap under the hot southern sun. Each upheaval off the track set the stage for the legend he would become on it, forging a character that refused to yield, whether to racetrack rivals or the delicate demands of a conventional personal life. He wouldn't be able to keep his private life private for much longer, and soon the entire racing world would see that the Earnhardts weren't just a family of skilled drivers. They were, in their own way, fierce competitors who understood that victory often demanded hard lessons. In 1972 at the Metrolina Motor Speedway in Charlotte, Dale Earnhardt faced off against his father Ralph Earnhardt in what would prove to be a unique, almost mythic family showdown. The field included both V8-powered monsters and smaller V6 cars. Dale, far from a seasoned veteran, barely qualified, squeaking onto the starting grid as if fate insisted they share the track on that day. This was their first and only time racing wheel to wheel, and as it turned out, it was destined to become a story that would never fade from the memory of anyone who witnessed it. Even though Dale was strapped into a smaller, less powerful car, he attacked the course as if fueled by something more potent than gasoline. There was a desperation and hunger in his driving, a need to prove himself under the critical eye of the man who'd taught him how to handle a wheel in the first place. Early in the race, it seemed as if the young Earnhardt might just slip away into the distance. Yet racing in those days was an unpredictable, brutal test of skill and nerve, and Ralph Earnhardt, a veteran with countless laps and victories behind him, began to reel in his son with the calm determination of a predator closing in on its prey. Dale, ever the respectful child in this extraordinary father-son duel, glanced into his rearview mirror and saw the familiar figure of his father's car closing the gap. Instinct and respect told him to move aside, to let the elder Earnhardt pass without resistance, a sign of deference that perhaps any son might consider when pitted against the very man who taught him to drive. But the moment Dale made room, Ralph refused to take the easy route. Instead of gliding by, he pressed even closer, staying right on Dale's bumper. With each roar of the engine, each squeal of the tires, the older Earnhardt pushed his son further into uncharted territory. The message was becoming clear. In this world of hard knocks and split-second decisions, you earned your position through steel will and relentless fight, not courtesy. What happened next cemented the lesson forever. As Dale tried to interpret his father's motives, maybe he wanted the outside line, maybe he was setting up some clever maneuver, Ralph unexpectedly bumped his son's car from behind. Then, in a move that seemed more like a test than a mere attempt to overtake, Ralph followed Dale toward the infield and bumped him again. To outsiders, it might have looked like rough tactics bordering on dirty play, but to anyone who knew Ralph, it was something else, an unforgettable lesson wrapped in a moment of high-speed drama. When Ralph finally did pass and went on to win the race, Dale understood the point. On that track, it didn't matter if you shared blood. What mattered was grit. You didn't move over for anyone, not even for your father. Out there, respect was earned by competing without compromise. Ralph, as tough a teacher as he was a racer, had done more than claim a victory that day. He had forged a crucial part of Dale's character, a trait that would define him in the years to come. Tragically, this defining moment between father and son would stand almost alone, a lasting memory that took on greater significance when, just 1 year later in 1973, Ralph Earnhardt died of a heart attack at the shockingly young age of 45. This loss hit Dale like a spin-out on the last lap of a championship race, leaving him adrift in a world that had lost its anchor. It would take Dale many years, through countless races and challenges, to feel as though he had finally proven himself to the man who guided him onto that speedway of life. By the time Dale Earnhardt joined Rod Osterlund Racing in 1979, he wasn't the only rookie driver looking to make a name for himself, but by season's end, he distinguished himself in ways that made the racing community sit up and take notice. One victory at the demanding Bristol track, a place known for its unforgiving high banks and rowdy crowds, combined with 4 pole positions and an impressive total of 17 top 10 finishes, showed that Dale was evolving into something greater than just another young hopeful. He was shaping himself into a warrior of the asphalt, molded by his father's firm hand, sharpened by personal hardships, and driven by the ghostly presence of a legacy that demanded nothing short of greatness. In the grand narrative of NASCAR's history, dominated by larger-than-life characters and legendary rivalries, the Earnhardt father-son duel at Metrolina stands as more than just an isolated event. It's a microcosm of racing culture's deeper truths. Respect and status must be carved out through raw skill and unshakable resolve. From that single race and the lessons embedded within it to the heartbreak of losing his father and forging his own mythic identity, Dale Earnhardt's journey was always about pushing beyond limits, those set by the track, by other racers, and even by the man whose name he proudly carried. He clinched the Rookie of the Year title despite missing 4 races due to a painful broken collarbone, proving from the start that he was made of tougher stock than most. His early years on the circuit were defined by both resilience and the reckless abandon that had already begun to set him apart. By 1982, however, Dale Earnhardt found himself at a difficult crossroads. Although he pulled off a stirring victory at Darlington, the track known as Too Tough to Tame for good reason, he also suffered a staggering number of setbacks that season, crashing out of 18 of the 30 races he entered. One of these wrecks at Pocono Raceway left him with a broken kneecap, a brutal reminder that his aggressive style could exact a steep physical toll. Yet, in many ways, these punishing experiences sharpened his instincts and hardened his resolve. Rather than changing his ways, these episodes seemed to fuel an internal fire, pushing him to show the world that when he got behind the wheel, he wasn't just another driver. He was a force of nature. By 1987, Dale Earnhardt had forged a reputation not merely as a fearless competitor, but one who often walked the razor's edge between bravery and recklessness. He had discovered that NASCAR's audiences were evolving, hungering for heroes who could not only win, but dominate with a fierce, unapologetic style. It was during that year's Winston All-Star race, an exhibition renowned for its fireworks and ego clashes, that Earnhardt's persona of the Intimidator crystallized. Defending his lead in a high-stakes moment, he found himself forced into the infield grass at speeds that would test the limits of human reflexes. Many drivers would have spun out or slowed down, surrendering hard-fought track position and perhaps the race itself. Not Earnhardt. With a calm defiance that bordered on supernatural, he wrestled the car back onto the asphalt, never yielding the precious lead he held. The crowd's disbelief turned into raucous cheers, and within moments the racing world was buzzing about a stunt that transcended normal driving skill. This move would become famously known as the pass in the grass, even though Earnhardt hadn't truly overtaken anyone during that daring maneuver. At a time when NASCAR was rapidly gaining in national popularity, Earnhardt's persona fit perfectly into the narrative of an old-school gladiator thriving in a modern arena. He reminded longtime fans of the gritty roots of Southern short-track racing, where a bent fender or a daring bump and run was just part of the show. His mastery at high speeds, combined with a penchant for taking lines on the track that others considered downright impossible, made him a kind of folk hero. Fellow drivers may have cursed his methods behind closed doors, yet they privately acknowledged the unrivaled skill that allowed him to pull off moves most would never dare. The press, too, couldn't resist chronicling his exploits. Comparisons to earlier legends who shaped NASCAR's identity, like Richard Petty or Cale Yarborough, arose, but Earnhardt was carving his own legacy. He was a champion who embraced the role of outlaw in a sport trying to balance its rebellious past with a modern, polished image. That convergence of grit, showmanship, and raw talent turned Dale Earnhardt from a mere contender into a living myth. Fans who flocked to the racetracks yearned for the adrenaline rush his driving provided, the relentless pursuit of victory, and the sense that with each daring maneuver, they were witnessing racing history unfold right before their eyes. By blending raw skill with an uncompromising will to win, bolstered by lessons learned from both brutal crashes and soaring triumphs, Earnhardt ensured that even missteps only fed his legend. This relentless approach to racing, forged in part by a string of painful injuries and losses, elevated him into a NASCAR icon long before he stopped turning laps. He had won plenty of fans with his thrilling victories and daring tactics, but Dale Earnhardt's unflinching approach to racing also bred a few enemies. After the Winston event in 1987, an enraged spectator sent a letter to the president of NASCAR, not merely complaining but threatening Earnhardt's life. In an era when fan passion sometimes ran as hot as the engines on the track, this was no idle threat. Federal authorities were brought in, and the FBI assigned agents to watch over Earnhardt at his next 3 races. Each weekend passed under tight security and anxious vigilance. And though no attack materialized, the mere existence of that threat stood as proof of the polarizing figure Earnhardt had become. His relentless quest for victory, the same quality that inspired awe in some, had fueled resentment and fear in others. By then, he was no longer just another talented driver. He was a symbol, a lightning rod for intense emotions that ran far beyond the grandstands. His uncompromising style on the track cultivated numerous rivalries. Competitors were forced to respect him, but off the record, some likely cursed his name and questioned his methods. Fans, too, were split. Some adored the bravado while others saw a bully behind the wheel. Regardless, his fierce driving cemented his status in NASCAR lore, and everyone seemed to know that wherever Earnhardt's black car prowled, drama was close behind. His trials at the Daytona 500 would become the stuff of legend, and not always for the right reasons. In 1986, it looked as though fortune was finally smiling upon him as he dueled Jeff Bodine in a riveting 2-car battle that had the crowd riveted. With just 3 laps remaining, Earnhardt's lead seemed secure, until an unscheduled pit stop forced by tire concerns slowed his charge. Roaring back onto the track, disaster struck. A burned piston robbed him of power and gifted Bodine the easy win. That crushing loss is often cited as the start of what would be called Earnhardt's Daytona 500 curse, a supernatural sounding but all too real string of misfortune that seemed determined to deny him this most cherished victory. In 1990, he appeared poised to break the curse, commanding the field with a formidable lead in the final moments. Victory and long overdue redemption seemed assured. But with just a handful of laps left, fate intervened again. His car struck a piece of bell housing left from an earlier crash, shredding a tire and sending him careening from first place to 5th. It was another brutal chapter in a story that was beginning to feel scripted by racing's cruel gods. The following year, armed with fresh determination, Earnhardt returned to Daytona, only to collide, quite literally, with nature itself. Early in the race, his car struck a seagull. While the incident may sound almost comedic, it had serious mechanical consequences, causing temperature issues that forced the crew to adjust on the fly. Still, he battled on, clawing his way into contention until Ernie Irvan snatched the lead from him with just 6 laps to go. Earnhardt kept pushing, his fiery spirit undimmed, but with a mere 2 laps left, his car betrayed him once more by spinning out. Once again, he was forced to watch someone else celebrate in victory lane. The 1992 season offered little consolation. Though he managed a crucial morale-boosting victory at the Coca-Cola 600 in Charlotte, an iconic event known for its grueling length and physical demands. That lone triumph stood out in a disappointing year. He ended up a career worst 12th in points and even recorded 3 last-place finishes, as if the racing gods wanted to remind him that skill and courage are sometimes no match for sheer bad luck. By 1993, the Daytona 500 had grown into Earnhardt's personal white whale. Leading with just 2 laps to go, he seemed on the verge of finally slaying the beast. Yet once more, this grand stage found a way to elude him. Dale Jarrett soared past in the final moments, leaving Earnhardt powerless to reclaim the lead. Astonishingly, this was now the 4th time he had led the Daytona 500 near its conclusion, only to see victory slip through his fingers. The curse, it seemed, had become part of NASCAR's collective folklore, binding Earnhardt's legacy to a track that offered him everything except that definitive win. The misery at Daytona persisted through 1996 and 1997, each failed attempt chipping away at the patience of a man who scarcely knew how to accept defeat. In 1997, with a mere 12 laps remaining, the race produced yet another scene of chaos, a multi-car rollover crash involving Earnhardt. As medics rushed to his aid, it looked like the final indignity, a heroic champion laid low once again. But in a moment that captured the very essence of his persona, Earnhardt realized his car could still run. Instead of riding off to the medical center, he jumped from the ambulance, climbed back behind the wheel of his battered machine, and coaxed it home to a 31st place finish. No triumphant victory this time, but it was proof that no matter how many times fate blindsided him, Earnhardt would never surrender quietly. The curse might have haunted him at Daytona, but it never broke his spirit. In that dogged refusal to give up, fans and rivals alike found something unforgettable, an iron-willed competitor, forging a legend as enduring, complicated, and fiercely captivating as the sport he helped define. He didn't always walk away from his wrecks unscathed. The 1996 Die Hard 500 at Talladega Superspeedway provided a harrowing reminder that even the Intimidator had his limits when it came to pure human vulnerability. Entering the race second in points and hungering for an 8th season title, Dale Earnhardt was a man on a mission, but fate had other plans. In the midst of Talladega's notorious high-speed chaos, Ernie Irvan lost control of his car and slammed into Sterling Marlin, touching off a chain reaction that turned one of NASCAR's fastest tracks into a scene of twisted metal and heart-stopping uncertainty. Earnhardt's iconic black number 3 Chevrolet was caught directly in the vortex of destruction, careening into the wall at nearly 200 miles per hour. Fans at the track gasped, many fearing they had just witnessed the unthinkable, and those watching at home would soon be confronted with terrifying news clips rather than live footage. Due to rain delays earlier in the day, the race's broadcast had been canceled partway through, leaving millions of viewers in the dark. Hours later, as nighttime sports segments finally showed the horrific crash, the footage looked as if it belonged more in a disaster reel than a sporting event. The crowd of first responders rushing to Earnhardt's mangled vehicle only deepened the sense of dread. For many who had watched him cheat death time and again, this moment felt different. There was a collective silent fear that the racing world might have lost its fearless hero. Astonishingly, just as rumors of tragedy began to take shape, Earnhardt himself emerged from the wreckage. He not only climbed out under his own power, but mustered the strength to raise an arm to the crowd, an extraordinary gesture that spread relief through the grandstands and across countless TV screens. Later, the brutal extent of his injuries became clear: a broken collarbone, a broken sternum, and a broken shoulder blade, any one of which would sideline a typical athlete for weeks, if not months. Yet, in a moment that would become part of his legend, Earnhardt stubbornly refused immediate medical attention. He was bloodied and in pain, but his message was clear. He would not yield easily. This terrifying incident was not the only reminder of just how perilous stock car racing could be. A similar crash had recently claimed the life of Russell Phillips at Charlotte, a tragedy that rattled the sport and forced NASCAR to re-examine the safety measures that drivers depended on. Amid increasing concerns about cockpit integrity, NASCAR introduced what would come to be known as the Earnhardt bar, a metal reinforcement installed to bolster the roof and windshield area, providing drivers crucial protection in high-impact rollovers and head-on collisions. This innovation likely saved numerous lives in the years following its adoption. Ironically and tragically, it could not save its namesake in the long run. With multiple fractured bones, many assumed Earnhardt would concede the remainder of the season and focus on healing. After all, even the toughest gladiators eventually need to rest their armor. Yet those who thought they knew him should have realized that stepping aside quietly had never been part of his script. Against all conventional wisdom and medical expectation, Earnhardt would soon prove that his resilience went beyond bruised bones and torn sheet metal. Just as he had climbed from the wreckage that terrifying day at Talladega, he would rise again to chase the checkered flag, defying pain and doubt in a way that continued to cement his legend as one of motorsport's most indomitable warriors. He simply couldn't keep himself out of the driver's seat. And just 1 week after that violent Talladega crash in 1996, Dale Earnhardt climbed back into a race car at Indianapolis. He tried to endure the pain and push forward, but after the first pit stop, he was forced to hand the wheel over to a teammate. That year, 1997, proved to be one of his most challenging seasons, and the lowest point came at the Mountain Dew Southern 500 in Darlington. Early in the race, and for reasons that no one could fully explain at the time, Earnhardt blacked out and slammed into the wall. Disoriented and suffering from double vision, it took him several agonizing laps just to locate his pit stall. This was not the fearless gladiator fans were used to seeing. Something was clearly wrong, and for the first time, his iron will seemed to be at war with his own body. Yet just when it seemed that Earnhardt's struggles would define the latter part of his career, February 15th, 1998, arrived, a date that would forever alter his legacy. After 2 decades of heartbreak and near misses, Dale Earnhardt finally did the unthinkable. He conquered the Daytona 500 curse. In his 20th attempt, he took the checkered flag first at the Great American Race. The celebration that followed became one of NASCAR's most revered moments. As he glided down pit road, crew members from every single team lined up to shake his hand, a spontaneous tribute rarely seen before, a testament not just to his skill, but to his importance to the sport itself. Then, adding an exclamation point, he spun his tires in the infield grass, carving out a giant number 3, etching his identity into the very turf of Daytona International Speedway. At long last, he stood as a Daytona 500 winner, transforming from a tortured contender into a triumphant master of the track's fickle fate. By the 2000 season, Earnhardt's resurgence surprised many who believed his best years lay behind him. Neck surgery had repaired lingering damage from that 1996 Talladega wreck, giving him renewed physical strength. He showcased this revival at Atlanta, edging out Bobby Labonte by an almost impossibly slim 0.01 second margin. At Talladega, the legendary restrictor plate battleground, He clawed his way from deep in the pack to overtake 17 cars in the final 4 laps, seizing victory in a manner so dramatic it left even longtime fans shaking their heads in disbelief. It was as if the Intimidator had rediscovered the ruthless brilliance that had built his legend in the first place. Going into the 2001 Daytona 500, the racing world seemed balanced on a knife's edge. Earnhardt had finally lifted his personal curse at Daytona, and fans wondered if another chapter of dominance awaited him. But fate had a cruel twist in store. On the final turn of the final lap, Earnhardt's car made light contact with Sterling Marlin's, sliding him off course and into the path of Ken Schrader. The second collision launched him head-on into the retaining wall at about 160 miles per hour. A thunderous impact that obliterated the right wheel assembly, snapped hood pins, and sent the hood smashing repeatedly against the windshield. The scene was instantly haunting. The hush that fell over the crowd was as chilling as the roar of engines had been moments before. Dale Earnhardt Jr., from his father's second marriage, raced past to claim a second-place finish just as the wreckage of the elder Earnhardt's car skidded into the infield grass. Schrader climbed out of his own battered machine and rushed over to check on Earnhardt. When he pulled down the window net, what he saw made his heart sink. Earnhardt lay unmoving, and the panicked signals to the paramedics told a story that needed no words. As medical crews arrived, many suspected the worst. Transported to the hospital, Earnhardt was pronounced dead soon thereafter. The official cause, a skull fracture caused by blunt force trauma. In the grim aftermath, as NASCAR officials searched for answers, they made a chilling discovery. According to their claims, the left lap belt in Earnhardt's safety harness had broken, potentially allowing his chin to strike the steering wheel and causing the fatal fracture. This revelation ignited a firestorm of controversy and fear. The belt manufacturer faced death threats and insisted that Earnhardt's team had installed the belt in a way that prioritized his comfort over proper alignment. Meanwhile, the racing community grappled with grief, confusion, and demands for change. A sports writer even tried to obtain the autopsy records and photographs, stirring ethical debates about privacy and public interest. Subsequent investigations concluded that belt failure had not been a significant factor, but the seeds of doubt and anguish had already taken root. Earnhardt's death accelerated a profound shift in NASCAR's approach to safety. Though the Earnhardt bar had already been introduced after previous accidents, the tragedy of his final race led to even more intensive reforms. The hands device, previously voluntary, soon became mandatory. Safer barriers were gradually installed at tracks where solid concrete had once been the only line of defense. These changes, though spurred by heartbreak, would save lives in the years to come. Yet no innovation, no matter how effective, could restore Earnhardt to the sport he had shaped. His legacy would endure as something more than just a statistic or a highlight reel. He was immortalized not simply because he amassed a claimed 100 cups in his career or achieved countless victories, but because he embodied a fearless spirit that transcended the confines of a racetrack. And though Dale Earnhardt himself could never truly outrun the curse of Daytona until the very end, his son, Dale Earnhardt Jr., would pick up the torch. Jr. carried the family name back into victory lane at Daytona twice, in fact, proving that the legacy was not buried with his father, but alive and evolving. The Earnhardt tradition, forged in speed, danger, and defiance, continued to remind everyone of the old family lesson. You don't move over for anybody, not even those bound to you by blood. As fans reflect on the life of Dale Earnhardt and all he represented, they find not just a driver who thrilled them, but a figure who pushed the entire sport to reckon with its risks, its rewards, and the ultimate cost of chasing victory at impossible speeds. If you enjoyed this telling, please consider giving a like and subscribing for more stories that explore the raw passion and haunting legends that define motorsport's greatest heroes.